Brother's wife constantly criticized me at family dinners. But when she suddenly filed for divorce, she tried to move into my apartment with her kids, acting like we were best friends, even though she had spent years destroying my reputation. I'm 25F, living in a tiny flat in Portland, writing on a freelance basis for just enough to pay the rent, and yet I feel more free than I ever did as a child. My 37M older brother, Callum, remains in our hometown back in Ohio, married, at least, was married, to Marisol, 36F. I recall the first time I ever saw her, when I was 17 and Callum invited her over for dinner. She was beautiful in that tightly polished sort of way that always left me feeling anxious, as if everyone else was about to see how flawed I was. And she did notice. Oh, she noticed me. Every subsequent meal had felt like a test, one I could never pass, no matter how hard I worked. "Are you seriously going to wear that?" she'd comment on a shirt I was trying to wear. "You should really do something with your hair." At first, I brushed it off and figured, well, maybe she's joking. But the jokes never stopped. And over time it became clear that she was surviving on criticizing what she thought was wrong with me. Not little things. It was even catty remarks she'd make to my parents, saying I was lazy or not motivated, suggesting I wasn't working hard enough in my life. As if she possessed some secret to who I was supposed to be. Callum simply shrugged during all of this. He was used to it, I think, or maybe he did not notice the harm. They had 2 children, Mateo, now 14M, and Isla, 8F. And whenever I tried to get close, Marisol would steer them away at all times, like I was this intruder trying to find an opening where I did not belong. And yet somehow I continued on. I'd remember something from when they were young, like Mateo's inaugural bike ride or Isla's absolute refusal to consume vegetables. And I'd feel this automatic affection, like I was a part of their lives. But I never felt invited into Marisol's life. She'd critique the food I made when I was over, talk about my attire, my apartment, even my laugh. I had started to avoid eating dinner with the family, instead finding it easier just to phone Callum on the phone than to tolerate the barely concealed aggression. It was exhausting. And then out of the blue, she'd handed him divorce papers. To be honest, it was a relief. Callum was tired, the children were restless, and for one moment, it seemed like the strain would lift. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. 1 month later, after the papers had been filed, Marisol called me, voice unusually subdued, more or less conspiratorial. "Hi, I was thinking maybe I could stay with you a while. You see, until we sorted out the house and that." I remember sitting there, phone in my hand, racing heart, because this was the same woman who had spent years belittling me, who turned every dinner into a minefield of criticism, who laughed a little too warmly when I tripped over a word or said something she categorized as naive. And now she was acting as if we were the best of friends. Even she said to me, "I know you always knew me," like some sort of emotional hook. I wanted to just hang up, tell her no, and slam the door in her face, but there was something about the way she said it, so matter of fact, like she assumed I would do it, so I hesitated. And then she mentioned the children, Mateo and Isla, and said they'd love to spend more time with you, and I know you don't mind having them over, right? My stomach nodded. I adored the children, of course, but having her over to my apartment, giving her room after all she'd done, it was a setup. I walked for hours, remembering all the criticism, all sneered insults in front of my parents, all helpful advice. That actually was a judgment. And yet there was something of me that remembered the little things, Isla's laughter at a joke about my cat, Mateo teaching me a card game, their faith in me despite Marisol's efforts. Could I really refuse them? But then I caught myself, no, not about the children. This is about her trying to rewrite history, to set herself up as this friend and victim and leave out all the years she spent tearing me down. I even started imagining the logistics. My tiny apartment, barely room for me, much less her and 2 children, the possible chaos, the night arguing, the stress she would bring with her. I could feel my chest tighten with rage thinking about her smiling that fake smile, acting like nothing ever happened, and I had to welcome her with open arms. I tried calling Callum, but he was at work, his weary voice over the phone telling me that he couldn't get himself dragged into it, that I was to do as I pleased with it. And so I was walking alone, weighing this impossible decision, remembering every horrible thing she'd ever done and suddenly realizing that this was the first time in years that I actually wanted to assert myself, wanted to say no. I won't let you just come along and remake our relationship on your own terms. I stayed up that night, sitting on my couch, thinking about the little faces of the children, their trusting eyes, and being torn between loyalty to them and years of anger against Marisol. And as the hours went by, I began creating a mental diary, almost a record, of all the little cruelties she had orchestrated against me, every word she spoke to twist my parents' perception of me, every moment she made me feel inferior. I knew that to accept her presence, even to rescue the children, would be like wiping all of it away, like I would be tricking myself out of my dignity. But rejecting her outright? That could hurt the children, and I couldn't bear that either. I remember sitting there, the apartment silent except for the whir of my old refrigerator, and feeling this strange mix of anger, fear, and guilt burning in my chest. I kept picturing her strolling into my apartment building, setting down her bags, breaking out that too tight grin, and saying, "Thanks for letting us stay here. I knew I could count on you." I wanted to scream, and yet if I closed my eyes I could visualize Mateo waving in his hand a picture that he'd drawn, Isla hugging me as she went to bed, and something dissolved in me. I saw that this wasn't about Marisol manipulating me. It was learning to deal with the aftermath of a failed marriage, and protecting the children without excusing her. I hadn't known the answer that evening, only a cluster of tangled emotion that refused to untangle itself, and I knew that the coming days would be a trial, not of sweetness, but of borders, of patience, and of cutting through somebody who had spent years wearing a mask for me. And as morning crept over my blinds, tinting stripes on the floor, I quietly swore to myself, I would not let her rewrite my script, but I would not throw away the bond that I had with those children. It was going to be ugly, messy, and probably painful, but for the first time in a long time, I was starting to view the situation in clear eyes, and that small spark of clarity was worth holding on to. The next weekend, Marisol showed up on my doorstep like she belonged there, dragging 2 suitcases behind her and smiling like nothing had ever happened. I'm 27F now, older, more tired from work, and definitely wiser. I opened the door, trying to keep my face neutral, and instantly was taken aback by how she strode in past me, dumping her bags in the center of my tiny living room as if it were home. Mateo and Isla trailed behind, wide-eyed but engaged, clutching their stuffed animals as security blankets. Marisol looked at me and spoke in this honey voice that I now knew was her. "I'm charming, so just give in." Voice. "Thanks again for letting us crash. I really didn't know where else to go." I longed to respond, "No, I didn't," but instead I nodded, trying to hide the tension that squirmed in my stomach. The morning was awkward, with Marisol chatting non-stop about how stressful the divorce was, how everything wasn't fair, and somehow weaving subtextual jabs about how my apartment was, how I could redesign furniture to make it more kid-friendly, which of course burned as another shot at me. I looked at Mateo hard, watching the way he regarded me as if he had something he wanted to say, maybe to open a box of toys, or on the couch, and I knew I had to set a tone, that I was there to facilitate him and Isla, but not play Marisol's drama. I attempted small talk with the children, inquiring about school, what they liked to do, favorite games, and for a time, it was fine, nearly as if they were little islands of safety in a sea of stress. But Marisol couldn't keep her mouth shut. An hour later, she was commenting on my ways in the kitchen, wondering why I hadn't used a more vibrant paint color on the walls, and dramatically sighing each time Mateo requested a snack. I could feel myself getting tight, coiled spring style, but I reminded myself, breathe, think of the children, don't let her get in my head. At one point, Mateo leaned forward and whispered, "Aunt Leora, do we have to be here?" And my heart twisted. I knelt down and whispered to him, gently, "Not forever, okay? For a little while, only, and I promise we'll make it comfortable." Isla smiled nervously, holding tight to her doll, and I found myself thinking, maybe I can do this without going completely out of my mind. During the next few days, I started noticing patterns. Marisol would compliment me on something I had said and then immediately criticize it, or she'd chat with me like we were old friends, then undermine me a bit in front of the kids. I remember one evening very clearly. I was helping Mateo with his math homework, and Marisol came in, slouching in the doorway. "Oh, you're doing it the wrong way, sweetie, Leora," she said, voice filled with affected concern. "I just always tend to explain it like this." Mateo eyed me, perplexed, and that old hot rage began its climb. I kept my voice low and said, "I've got this," and she bristled, storming out of the room as if I'd offended her personally. I spent the evening on my couch writing in my notebook as I do when I have to get things through. I was thinking to myself that although she was technically in my space, she couldn't dictate to me, and it made me feel a little in control. And then came the guilt. What if I was being unreasonable to her? The kids were innocent, and they looked up to me for guidance. I couldn't allow my temper to get the best of me and affect them. By the third day, things slightly improved. Marisol had convinced herself that I was indebted to her with a proper family meal, as if we were longtime friends, and she instructed me to prepare while she sat and ordered me about like some sort of culinary general. I tried to be diplomatic, but when for the 5th time she complained about the spices, I snapped. "You know, Marisol, I can cook as I like. Mateo and Isla are fine, and I don't need instructions from you." The silence that followed was oppressive, and I could feel the shock in the children's eyes. Mateo muttered something about not liking trouble, and I longed to hug him, but held my ground. Marisol glared, then grinned, the grin that gave me goosebumps, as though she already had her next move in mind. That night I couldn't sleep. I was constantly thinking about her years of making fun of me, about the thoughtless cruelness I'd endured, and how easily now she was playing at being my friend. I remembered a flashback from high school. Marisol had been present the night I'd been turned down from the college I'd been determined to get into. While my parents were trying to reassure me, she sat back, arms crossed, and grumbled. "Well, you weren't probably ready for that in the first place." I dismissed it back then, but now remembering, it had been a small betrayal, one rung on a very long ladder. And yet, during my fifth night, I also remembered the time with the children, Mateo's shy smile as I showed him how to play chess, Isla's laughter of delight when I read her a bedtime book. All those little things reminded me that it wasn't all about Marisol. It was about surviving the imperfect after, protecting the kids, and keeping myself upright without dragging them into the crossfire. During the next week, I found a rhythm. I left the kids to their own devices, helped them with school projects, and tried to remain neither warm nor cold around Marisol. She, of course, tried to push boundaries at every opportunity, requesting, borrowing my clothes, or hinting that I wasn't listening closely enough, but I held my ground. I knew boundaries weren't walls, boundaries were clarity. I would allow her into my life for the kids' sake, but I wasn't going to allow her to redefine history or steal my sense of self. And in the meantime, the children slowly relaxed in my company, thinking that I was a credible person even if their mother was not able to be normal. I remember one day Mateo whispered, "I like it here, Aunt Leora," and Isla chimed in with a small hug. At that point, I knew that no matter how manipulative Marisol tried to be, I could establish a space of safety, kindness, and normalcy for the children. And although it was exhausting, emotionally draining, and sometimes maddening, I started to find a small amount of control too. To the effect that I wasn't merely reacting to her, but actually creating what occurred, protecting the ones I cared for, and refusing to let her dictate my feelings or my life. In a matter of weeks, I was 28F, and stress in my apartment was something I hadn't anticipated. Marisol had just moved in as if she owned the place, leaving her luggage out, redecorating the furniture, and dropping offhand remarks that had the feel of thinly disguised insults. The kids were settling in, Mateo laughing at his usual jokes, Isla tugging on my arm for stories at night, but every so often I would catch Marisol giving me that hard, calculating look, the one that reminded me of all those years of hidden meanness. I was preparing dinner one evening when she arrived and mentioned, "You know, when I was your age, I never had to concern myself with, well, anything. You need to be more organized, it would do the children well." My fingers clasped the spatula firmly, and I turned to face her, pounding heart in my chest. "I am organized enough," I stated, trying to keep my voice level. "The children are fine. You need to cease and desist from advising me." She tilted her head, mouth twisting up into that infuriating, pseudo-sweet smile, and shrugged, as if she'd done nothing wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. I replayed every moment, every sentence, and realized part of the problem was I'd allowed her to re-establish our dynamic to her advantage. She sought to make me feel guilty, to come completely to her, over the years of perpetual criticism which she had stockpiled. But I could not turn my back on the needs of the children, their comfort within my house, and the genuine love we had created. I remembered when Mateo opened my door that afternoon, clutching a drawing he had done of all of us in his hand and exclaiming, "We're a team, right?" And Isla shyly hugging me, whispering softly, "I like it here, Aunt Leora." That small spark of love reminded me of the reason I couldn't simply dismiss them to punish Marisol. The next several days were a tightrope walk. I made it clear what was acceptable. No criticism of my cooking, no rearranging my things, and no disrespect for me in front of the kids. She constantly tested limits, asking to borrow my attire, commenting on me being clean, and from time to time, during a laid-back chat, interjecting something such as, "I can't believe Callum allowed you to lease such a small flat," which was a personal affront. I was imaginatively making mental notes, remembering every line I would never cross, every time I would remain calm and assertive, and every time I would have to place the children above my anger. But there was that day when the breaking point came. I'd arranged a little day out for the children, ice cream, followed by a visit to the park, and Marisol charged in, demanding to be included, saying she understood the kids would want it that way. My chest clenched. I had a decision to make. Let her dictate the day, destroying the safe haven that I'd established for Mateo and Isla, or hold firm and risk an emotional meltdown. I took a deep breath and informed her, "This is something I have arranged for the children. You can come later if you wish to, but it's their turn with me now." She blinked uncertainly, clearly not accustomed to disobedience, and muttered something before marching off to her room. The children looked at me in question, and I knelt beside them. "It's all right," I whispered. "We're still having fun. This is our day." Mateo smiled, Isla hugged me, and I felt a sense of victory. However, the relief was short-lived. That night, Marisol started texting Callum, painting me in a bad light as hard to get along with, nasty, and unreasonable. I paid little attention to it initially, but later on, I had to call him. Callum, exhausted from work and the breakup, had promised me that he trusted me, but to hear it all from him stung in ways that I hadn't expected. I realized that even with firm boundaries, her manipulation didn't end but rather shifted allegiances. And now my integrity with my brother was in question. I thought of high school, where she had insidiously poisoned me against teachers and friends, and the shiver ran down my spine. But this time I had some ammunition, my own clear head, the happiness of the children, the timeline of events, and I promised myself that I would not let her lie on me. Throughout the next few weeks, I learned how to control the madness on a new game plan. I established routines, clearly stated expectations, and maintained interaction with the children brief and useful. Marisol persisted in attempting subtle undermining, but I was no longer the same person she'd insulted growing up when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. I'd become someone capable of defending herself and defending the people she loved. Mateo and Isla started calling me Mom, in a playful manner sometimes, and I recognized that they trusted me, although their mother's stability remained uncertain. One afternoon, Isla whispered, "Aunt Liara, you always make me feel safe." My throat constricted, and I had to blink away tears. That was the real reason I was enduring all this. Because for the children, I could provide stability that Marisol couldn't, even though she was charming and manipulative. By the end of that month, I had reached an unspoken détente. I would allow Marisol to stay, but I would not be her victim. She might complain, she might criticize, she might try to manipulate me, but I had learned boundaries and strategies that kept me in charge of my space and my emotions. I was exhausted, sure, but there was a weird sense of empowerment too. I realized that years of belittling had taught me something special. How manipulative people operate, and more importantly, how to protect myself without hurting the people I love. It was crazy, emotionally draining, and sometimes heartbreaking, but I was finally realizing that being nice didn't mean being a doormat, and that it was acceptable to love the kids unconditionally and love Marisol for exactly who she was. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the distant snoring of Mateo and the soft breathing of Isla, I felt a quiet determination. I couldn't wipe out the past, but I could shape the present, and that was sufficient, for the time being. By the following month, I was 29F, and the apartment had slipped into a tentative routine that was draining and strangely comforting. Marisol had dropped out of overt attempts to control every little thing, though she continued to make cutting comments and leave passive-aggressive reminders that she was always watching, always judging. Mateo and Isla, however, had grown more bossy, more comfortable with me, and it was clear they had started to look on me as a safe refuge in the storm of their parents' separation. One evening, I was on the couch with them, Mateo leaning against me, and Isla with her legs tucked under her, and I realized that despite all her manipulations, Marisol had not broken down the relationship that I was building with these children. I considered how exactly I'd had to control each encounter, when to step in, when to let the kids' voices take over, when to stand firm against Marisol in a calm, icy way, and when to just let her rant. It was exhausting, yes, and I hated her for what she'd done, for the long, slow tortures, and for inserting herself into my life as if I had no agency. But I also came to realize, wincingly, that she was a woman who would always do for herself first, who existed on the manipulation of perception, and that if I was going to maintain my own integrity, I needed to comprehend her for what she was without allowing anger to drive every move. There was one day in particular that was seared into memory. Marisol had been oddly subdued, sitting in my creaky recliner, scrolling through her phone. I was preparing dinner, not allowing her intrusion to break my concentration, and Mateo questioned whether pancakes would make good dinner, in jest. Marisol laughed lightly, not snappishly, and for a moment I caught sight of the woman that could have been kind if she had made alternative decisions all those years before. For a moment it pained me, but I pushed it away. I was well aware that empathy didn't mean vulnerability. I called her later in the week, after calling her out for what she'd done. "Marisol, I want the kids to be happy here, but you can't criticize me or bully the situation. I won't put up with it." She blinked, surprised, and then smiled, seeming not to expect me to find my words. Miraculously, she nodded. I think, quietly, she realized that I was not the awkward teenager that she had demeaned all those years ago. I kept her around, yes, but my own way. The children prospered. Mateo started reading more, bringing me his school assignments, looking for my input rather than his mother's. Isla started doing drawings for me, scribbling tiny pictures and messages all over the apartment. They laughed, snarked at each other like siblings, and most importantly, they believed in me. The reality was that this equilibrium had been tenuous. I could not change Marisol, and I could not erase the past, but I had learned something essential. Taking care of myself and the children did not mean cutting them off from their mother completely. It meant seeing reality, setting boundaries, and not letting manipulation dictate the tone in my house. Callum eventually did visit, seeing for himself how the children were safe, content, and flourishing, and I knew he'd begun to see Marisol as she really was, and not simply the deliberately constructed facade she wore on family calls. That pleased me in a quiet manner, though I didn't dwell on it. Life was still flawed, messy, and complicated, but I was more resilient than I'd been in years. I could laugh at Mateo's terrible jokes, comfort Isla when she skinned her knee falling down, and even share a meal with Marisol without being in combat mode. The emotional scars still existed, sure, but no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. I understood that control is an illusion and that stability results from boundaries, integrity, and a clear sense of who you are and what you are not going to put up with. On the night the last before Marisol and the children left for a short while to visit their father, I held them both close. Mateo whispered, "Thanks for everything, Aunt Leora. I am safe with you." Isla buried her face against my chin, yawned, and was asleep, mumbling, "I like it here. Don't go away." I had tears in my eyes, but I fought them. At that moment, all the years of criticism that had gone on, all the tension, all the late nights pacing and worrying, seemed to have reduced to this, a gentle victory of love, endurance, and patience. Marisol, gathering her suitcases, extended me that same sugary smile, but I recognized it as an empty act. It was no longer about me. I had staked my own ground, protected the children, and lastly realized that her attempt to alter our history couldn't win if I stayed rooted in reality. And as I watched them disappear over the horizon, I realized that life was not about forgetting the past or forgiving reluctantly. It was about choosing where to put your feet, whom to fight for, and how to hold on to your own sense of self in a mad world. I knew this was not the end. There would be further visits, further tests, and maybe even further manipulation. But I also knew I was ready. I had survived her, protected the kids, and discovered strength I didn't even know was within me. And for maybe the first time in a very, very long time, I felt an internal sense of clarity, the kind that didn't need to be cheered or acknowledged. I simply knew I was solidly in my own life, unskated by a human being who had spent years attempting to ruin me. The kids were safe, the apartment was mine, and I no longer worried about saying no. And as I shut the door on them, letting the apartment drift into a peaceful silence, I realized that the years of struggles had shaped me into a person able to love with strength, fight ruthlessly, and see clearly, even when other individuals tried to obscure the truth.